Welcome to the Product Quest podcast. Thank you for joining us on our journey to better understand innovation and product strategy. My name is Jonathan Edwards, and joining me as always, my co-hosts Jan Vermuth and Scott Burleson. We continue our discussion with software engineer and agile coach William Bartlett. Last time we spoke in episode 68, we discussed William's journey from waterfall to agile. We discussed the many potential benefits of taking an agile approach when it is done well, but also the difficulty many teams face in making it work for them, even when they are serious about making it work. So we talked about the source of this problem and whether it was simply due to a mindset problem, as is often suggested. And William argued that the issues go deeper than a simple problem of mindset, and it has to do with how to teach and learn tacit knowledge, which is knowledge that is difficult to express or extract, like how to ride a bike, for example. He argued that this type of knowledge is better acquired through practice by following mentors and through one's own experience in doing the activity. So today we want to dive a bit deeper into this topic of tacit knowledge and connect with other things. So we're going to go beyond just the teaching of the problem of tacit knowledge in the teaching of agile concepts and how it plays a role. We're going to talk about how it plays a role in design and innovation more generally, beyond what we discussed last time. So we'll be discussing fancy things such as 4E cognition, Gibsonian ecological psychology, and maybe a bit of Cynevin within that. So looking forward to all those juicy topics. And so, William, it's really great to have you on again, and welcome.
Thank you. It was a huge honor to be on once and to be asked back again. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. So let's dive right in. So the first question is about this tacit knowledge. So why is it that we can't formalize tacit knowledge? Is it just that teachers are lazy? They're not, maybe thinking about it enough, or is there something deeper going on there, in your opinion?
So just a shortish answer would be part of it I don't know. Part of it could be also time and having enough perspective. I think that especially if you look at historical events, you look at the things unfolding at the time they are, and you can't necessarily put words on them. But as time progresses and people take a look at things, new terms pop up, and we start being able to say, okay, well, that time was this. We attach words to certain times. So one example is my children are learning about the different time periods in history, and so there's like prehistory, and then various like antiquity and medieval times, and then you get to modern contemporary. And I think that one day that term modern will change to something else in future generations, in future centuries. They're going to call what we call contemporary, they're going to call something else. Some people float around the idea that we're in the information age, for instance, with the dawn of the internet. Maybe that term will stick around, and with what's happening since COVID, maybe that will be seen in hindsight as a turning point. So I think that not just history, but other concepts, as they're being unfolded, we don't necessarily have terms for them. It takes a while to find something that will stick. So I think that's part of it. And another part is that, there are certain things that either we can't find terms for, or we just don't have terms for them. So to go into a philosophical concept, there's the concept of qualia that has been proposed and bandied around by various philosophers. So to refer to the various sensations, and one of the main illustrations is red. When I see a red object, do I have the same sensations as somebody else who sees a red object? We both can look at the same object and say, okay, it's red, but do we have the same experience of redness? And I'm not talking about people who are colorblind, who are blind, but people who see the color red and manage to identify that same color. Do they have the same experience? And then there's the thought experiment about if you have somebody who's in a completely grayscale environment, and it's a researcher that studies the experience of seeing red or seeing color, and so they can experiment on people who can see color, but they are not submitted to that experience ever of seeing color. So they manage to analyze things. They come up with great theories, and they know just about everything theoretical that there is to know about color. And then when the question is, if you take that person and you finally show them something of color, something like red, do they learn anything new? So is there a knowledge,
Yeah.
is the knowledge of the experience something that's different from the theoretical knowledge of the phenomenon?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I remember asking myself this question when I was younger, thinking always, I mean, do people see the same red that I see, for example? Yeah. And I completely agree. I mean, can you basically encompass the whole notion of red into some kind of formalized way? Yeah, probably not. So, maybe let's just move on to and see if we can make a connection on to or let's put it a bit. Let's start with something else. The Have you found, and I think we did discuss this a bit last time, but is there any way we can make this teaching of tacit knowledge somehow more efficient? Or because the basic idea, and correct me if I'm remembering wrong, is that you need to actually go through the motions and actually act and interact with the material to acquire this tacit knowledge. But that, of course, is very long, and it's not very directed somehow. It's so as we're trying to look for maybe better ways of doing things, is there like a general formulation of how we can make learning this make it easier to learn this kind of knowledge and more efficient?
Yeah, so I won't say that I'm an expert completely on this kind of topic. I can give a few pointers and a few references. So I would definitely study up on people who have talked about tacit knowledge and knowledge management. So I think a lot about Larry Prusak, Prusak. He unfortunately recently passed away. I think it was towards the beginning of this year. But he did a lot of work on and drew upon prior work on knowledge management. I would say that we can take inspiration from things that already work. So you mentioned one of the quintessential examples of tacit knowledge is how to ride a bike. Well, how do we teach children how to ride a bike? So, what do? We just set them in an environment where it's safe to fail. I think that's one of the keys. In fact, another person who's done a lot for knowledge management is Dave Snowden. We know of Cynevin fame, but he's also done a lot of things in knowledge management, and he has 7 principles for knowledge management. And one of them is that controlled failure teaches us better than success. Yep. So there are various things where I think we need to look at what works, look at some of the theories that are there, and also to recognize a couple of things. Is that it's more about putting people in an environment that will allow them to learn things. So setting up it's not necessarily telling people, since the tacit knowledge cannot be explicit, let's not try and do it. Let's try and figure out how to put people in the right environment so that the learning emerges.
And
the last thing is that because the learning emerges, one of the thoughts that I've had recently is that we might need to relinquish predictable learning objectives on an individual level. Mm-hmm. We might need to think that for certain competencies, the general population needs to have a certain percentage of each of these different competencies. And in a project, I'm going to need a certain percentage of these. But that no 2 individuals will gain the same tacit knowledge over their life, and that's fine. It's not possible to teach everything to everyone, and so we need to rely on that kind of statistical emergence, so that we know that enough people are getting the right knowledge.
Well, I guess when you think about artists, for example, I mean, there's only one person who has the tacit knowledge to be Van Gogh, for example. I mean, well,
Yeah,
so I guess that makes sense. Yeah, I like that. Um,
Right.
so
The example that comes to mind is I've got two daughters, 10 and 12. They play soccer or football, whichever you prefer to call it. But you know what the coach will do is they'll set up a drill that will simulate a game with the idea of this safe environment to fail. He probably does have very specific learning objectives. However, to execute, but the things they need to actually learn to do it is probably much broader than the like. I just want you to be able to quickly trap the ball and pass it. I mean, they sort of have to see and anticipate. There's really, but it's a simulated real life situation, and and you'll do the drill over and over and over and now, but it's still not the same as the game. It still doesn't have all the variability. Like if somebody's playing defense on you in a drill, they're not, they might initially like completely stay away from you. And then they might, okay, sort of a little bit try to, put pressure on you. And they're just sort of slowly ramping up the pressure to go from what's clearly a simulation to try to get it closer to reality. I don't know. That was just sort of what came to mind, William, as you were talking about it. You know, and I mean, you
yeah.
could probably think of other examples.
I think sports is one of the areas where we can get a lot of inspiration. I'm always a bit wary of bringing sports metaphors into strategy, because I think it's wrong, because sports have rules that are fixed, whereas strategy and business, what are the business rules that are fixed?
Yeah, right.
Apart from laws which can still change, the rules of the game in business, they aren't fixed. They can be rewritten. But I think definitely for this kind of knowledge acquisition, I see a lot of good metaphors in sports. One of them is like come out with exercises that will force you to do the right thing. Otherwise, you won't manage the exercise. So in a proper game, you can compensate certain inefficiencies just through sheer power sometimes. But then, so I've done some softball and baseball. You can really damage your arm if you aren't being efficient as a pitcher. And so when I was doing softball pitching, one of the things that my coach noticed was that I wasn't, because in softball pitching you have to throw the ball using a windmill motion. And you have your arm goes from down, up, round, back, and then forward, and you throw it forward underhand. And to get that really efficiently, you've got to have the ball always has to stay in the same plane. If it wobbles, you're losing in efficiency. You're losing accuracy usually. That was my problem. And so quite simply, one of the exercises that my coach had me do was to put me next to a wall. So I would, if the ball was moving out of the plane, my hand would bump against the wall. I would know immediately that I was doing the wrong thing, and it helped me correct, get the right feeling and help me correct it. Whereas in the match, I was able to compensate sometimes.
This also is your principle of controlled failure. Like the wall was feedback. That was your failure, giving you feedback. Yeah.
But I also feel like this expands, in a sense, beyond tacit knowledge. I mean, at least in my experience, sometimes at least when we do coaching, and it's something I struggled with in the beginning, is that I think some mistakes, mistakes or some mistakes or failures need to be made in order to get the lesson. If you would just give them the lesson, it kind of wouldn't do the trick. They would. So, I mean, this is a bit abstract, but like in certain situations, I feel like if you would help somebody you're coaching avoid the mistake in the first place, they would lose an important lesson. So of course, it needs to be in a controlled way, and you need to guide them somehow. But I feel like, and that expands in my view beyond this tacit knowledge, which I feel is sometimes it's a different kind of knowledge. It's a different thing than knowing rules or knowing facts or whatever. So I feel like it's even broader. The value of controlled failure, I think you said.
Yeah, and we mustn't forget that the tacit and explicit knowledge are highly linked.
Yeah.
the definition of every word behind that definition is tacit knowledge. If you look up in the dictionary the definition of a word, and you keep looking up the definitions of the words that are used in that prior definition, at one point you keep regressing, and you're going to get into a loop.
Yeah,
you're not gonna, so it's always relying on prior knowledge, prior experience.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, not quite sure how to make the jump, so I think I'll just dive straight in it and bring out the the words that do that maybe scare some people. I don't know, but so how can we connect this to this 4E cognition? And what is 4E cognition? I've heard a lot of people talk about this throughout the years, especially designers bringing it up, and I've read a bit about it, of course, but what could you say about this?
Yeah, so 4E cognition is a hypothesis. It is a hypothesis in cognitive neuroscience about how people think, how people make decisions, how people perceive the world, and then transcribe that into action. And so the hypothesis is that it's not just the brain. We don't just think with our brain, and we don't just make decisions with our brain. We also make our decisions so the 4 E's are embodied, embedded, extended, and enacted. And so each of those 4 E's are 4 different hypotheses that were separate over the years, over the past century, but were gradually regrouped into one unit of study. And so, so if we go back, so embodied, it's not just the brain, it's also our bodies. So that's actually really robust nowadays. If you tell people, well, you know what, the microbiome in your gut has an influence on how you think. That's I've heard that for quite a long time, and it has quite robust research, scientific research behind that. But there isn't just your gut. There's also your reflexes. So you put your hand on a fire, your hand's going to move away before your brain triggers. And there are lots of other examples about how the body is used to reason as well. Embedded means that you think when you make decisions, you're also using your social environment. So a lot of decisions are actually made for you by the society. Main example is norms. It's not good to do this. It's not good to do that. To take a religious example, it would be the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not, thou shalt not.
Yeah, or just shaking hands, for example. That when you meet, you shake hands. This kind of stuff is also a form.
Yes, you don't make that decision. It's like instinctive. And then there could be like rules and regulations. So in England, you drive on the left. In America, in France, continental Europe, you drive on the right. These are just things that are instinctive, that have already been decided for you. You don't wake up every morning thinking, maybe I'll drive on a different side of the road today and just see what happens. And it helps with the fluidity, because you don't have to take so much energy in making so many decisions.
Mm-hmm.
You can offload decisions culturally, socially, in various different levels of units. It spreads out the burden of thinking. Then there's extended. So your cognition is extended also to the tools that you use. And tools can also be clothing. So for instance, if you are, depending on what you're wearing, you're not going to act the same way. Depending on what tools you have available. Yeah, if you're wearing just drab clothes, you're going to not think very much of what you do or how you present yourself. If you're wearing a tuxedo and you're at a soiree, you're not going to act the same way. You're not going to make the same decisions. Hopefully, yes. Some people that you can dress them up.
Some people mix it up.
But your clothing and the uniform that you wear has an impact on your cognition. But there's also tools like your telephone. If I have my phone, I'm not the same as if I don't have my phone. The fact that we are used to Googling things quickly with our telephones, that has an impact on our cognition. There was a study that said that people who have the habit of looking things up quickly on the internet have an overestimate their knowledge of things. You ask them, do you know this? And they will generally, people who have the habit of looking things up, they will generally think that they know more than they actually know. So yeah, and also extended in the sense that if I ask you a really tough multiplication, you're going to pull out a pencil and a piece of paper. You're using external tools to execute the thinking.
I'll pull out a calculator though, but yeah.
Or you pull out a calculator. It's the same. And then taking notes, like so many people say, "Oh, I have a second brain on this tool." Taking notes, taking photos. There was a study that said that people who take photos on vacation tend to remember their vacation less because they know that they've offloaded that to the external storage. Yeah. And then the last one, enacted, is that perception isn't passive. It isn't, okay, things are just hitting me on my eyes, the sound waves in my ears, touch and stuff, so on. It's not just things that are just hitting us and then we're translating that into action. It's that we are actually actively sensing things. We're actively pursuing signals. We are actively filtering out signals as well, because everything, if we tried to process everything, it would just, we'd have to have a brain much bigger and it would use a lot more energy. So we're choosing what to look for, what to concentrate on, and we're also using our past experience to inform what we're going to perceive. So one of the experiments I cite is the hollow face illusion. If you Google that, you can find this little spinning image of a face, and on one side the nose is coming out, and on the other side, well, it's hollow. The nose is going in, as if you had a mask. You could do this with like a face mask, like a Halloween face mask or something, and you could just sort of turn it round. Obviously, it would have to be painted on the other side, but and you notice that generally, even if the face is hollow, you perceive it as not hollow. And why is this? Well, the hypothesis is that you're so used to seeing faces with the nose out, you'd never see a face or somebody with a face that's got the nose completely in, that you assume that that's always going to happen. You use prior information to construct your perception. And so that's the 4 E's. And generally, it comes in a sort of a package of saying, yeah, it's not just the brain. It's also other things. And so one of the lessons is that if you want to analyze behaviors, usually the individual is not the right level of granularity, because the individual's cognition is regulated, is influenced by so many external factors. You've got to take those things into account. So groups, environments, context really need to be brought into the equation.
Yeah, so we had this, I forget now which episode it was, where we were talking about the fact that creativity was it doesn't come from us, from our brain. It comes from, so it was the episode with Ian Kerr and Jason Frasca. And it was about how creativity is actually comes throughout an interaction between our mind and the environment at the same time. So I think that, would you think that connects a bit to this?
Absolutely. And so one thing, I have an artist friend, and she said, one idea to sort of create things is sometimes she just doodles on a pad absent-mindedly. She's not looking at what she's doing. She's just letting a pen or a pencil just sort of roam around a paper, and then look at it and think, oh, what is that? What does that make me think of? sort of like a personal Rorschach test, but
Yeah. So I think we'll get into that. I just wanted to talk about another kind of field that's often bunched up with 4E cognition, which is J.J. Gibson's ecology of mind, which I think also has had a lot of success in Silicon Valley type areas. And so I know that he talked about affordances. I don't know if he was the first person to bring up affordances.
Yes.
But how does that connect? Is it correct to say that it links up?
Yes, definitely. So it's ecological psychology. And so yes, Gibson is one of the initiators of that, and it's one of the feeders into the 4Es. I think it feeded most into enacted and embodied cognition. So the idea of an affordance is that there are actions that are suggested by our environment. So in affordance, the main example I give is a handle on a door. It affords putting my hand on it and turning it. And there's a big difference usually between the United States and Europe, is that in Europe we have handles that that are like bars that come out, and so you have to pivot it down. Whereas in the United States, a lot of the door handles are knobs that you have to turn around. And so that the shape of the door handle or the knob will suggest how to use it. We know instinctively that, we got to position our hand in a certain way to turn the door handle in Europe, and we have to put our fingers in a different position to then pivot the knob on the door in the United States. One definition of affordance is to say that it's a property of the environment or another actor. So another person can afford something. Like if I stick my hand out to shake your hand, that affords you sticking your hand out and shaking my hand back. But affordances aren't strictly a property of something else. It's a relationship between an actor and either the environment or another actor. So one of the examples I was given was that a cat will like to lay down on a coffee table. Would we like to lay down on a coffee table? Would we find that a comfortable environment to lay down on?
No. Yeah.
Different, animals or different people will perceive different affordances depending on who they are and what the environment provides.
Yeah, one I had in mind is a coffee cup, where if you have very big hands, let's say, or very small hands, it'll change really how you can pick up the cup. So something is maybe afforded to someone with a certain morphology, but maybe not to someone else. And so it's that notion of relationship, I think, is quite interesting. And so I want to try and make the connection. So last time we talked quite a bit about how obviously it's a bit of a challenge to teach this tacit knowledge, and I think today the idea was to go a bit beyond just this notion of teaching agile in tacit knowledge, but saying actually this kind of, let's say, broad problem we also find in design and innovation. So I wondered if you had if you were able to make this connection. Why do we find the same problem in design and innovation in general? What has this got to do with that?
With agile, well, I think that yes, agile could have benefited from some UX design. The Agile Manifesto probably doesn't create the right affordances. One of the examples I give also is like a daily stand-up meeting. I think we can all quite easily recognize that just giving the instructions for a daily stand-up meeting and having them executed by a team that has no knowledge of agile, that will not make them agile. It doesn't afford agility in the sense that a lot of agile coaches or practitioners would recognize. So I think there's a problem with the methods and the design of the methods. That means that we're not creating the right affordances. I love giving some examples of anti-affordances to try and sort of make it less abstract. So Don Norman, who is very well known with the design of everyday things, his book, on the cover of that book, there is a very particular teapot, which has the handle of the teapot underneath the spout. And so that's often called the masochistic teapot, because, well, you could theoretically, you can actually physically serve the tea without burning yourself, but it's more likely that if you're going to serve the tea because the spout's on the side with the handle, that you're going to burn yourself. So is it really affording a good experience having the teapot designed like that? Probably not. And so what I often quip is, I think sometimes when we say, oh, you're not getting the right results because you're not using the tool right, I sometimes come back saying, but have you given them a masochist teapot or not? So I think the challenges of design, we have them in Agile because it was not necessarily designed.
Yeah. But would you? Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just saying. I was thinking before about this. I think one of the ways in which to show these affordances is, well, I was thinking of the Norman door. I don't know if that's something. So Norman doors, at least, I don't know if it's the same Norman, to be honest. But like, these are the doors, and I'm remembering this because we had a client who, they were in a building where all of the doors were Norman doors, and the Norman door is one where when you look at it, and like, it's really hard to figure out why you perceive it that way, but you think it's a door that you need to push, but you actually need to pull it, or the other way around. So whatever the design of the door is, it suggests kind of a different way of opening it than when you would encounter it. And I think that's something, it's super strange when you encounter it. It's almost like, or I have these other experiences where middle of the night, you go to the fridge and you expect a certain kind of drink, but it's a different one. So it's extreme how much kind of expectations influence how you perceive things. And I think that has an impact mainly on design, of course, of the solution. That I think that UX was probably, or UX people were probably the people that more and more bring this up as something that we otherwise in a concept will never think about. Or I think that's really due to a lot of the UX people who thinks a lot about how humans perceive stuff, and that has implications, I think, for solution design.
Yes, totally. And we mustn't underestimate the exploratory nature of that. That we know a lot about perception, and UX designers know a lot more about perception than the average person. That doesn't mean that they always have the solution. They can always calculate the solution in advance. They can probably say more about what we shouldn't do than what we should do, and then their method of operation is going to be trying things out. We eliminate all the stupid ideas, and then amongst those that aren't deemed stupid, we're just going to try things out and see how people react.
So I've got, I still want to dive a bit deeper into really innovation and design in general. And the idea a bit further down in the conversation is to connect up with jobs to be done at some point and discuss that. But I would like to understand a bit better how so in the process of design and innovation, is there any kind of connection with, let's say, 4E cognition or tacit knowledge? So the person doing the innovation, doing the design, is this something that he has to be or she has to be aware of?
The times where I've used 4E cognition has been on how to design organizations. So organizational design has also a lot of different experts and expertise There are some parts of organizational design that haven't really panned out because they didn't take into account this sort of extended cognition to the it's not just the brain, it's the body and the relationships between people. So the design, the first point where I'll reach for that in my personal experience is going to be how to figure out how to change methods. We currently have a certain kind of method that we're using for the project. We may have already brought in agile, or we're looking to bring it in. And one of the questions is, well, how do we do it? How do we seem to be at an impasse in our company culture. Well, how do we change that? Well, culture, that's really difficult to, let's say it's easy to change culture, actually. It's not difficult to change. It's just easy. It's very difficult to make a predictable change in culture. And so we should probably just write that off. And so a lot of people will over focus on the individual, saying, okay, we'll change the individuals, we get the individuals right, and then we'll put the individuals together. And because the individuals are right, the together bit will be right. And that's just like, no. Have you never seen, coming back to sports, have you ever seen a star-studded team that had no idea how to play together?
Yeah.
And then in design in general, I think, yes, 4ecog is quite obviously used by some. And that's going to be if we're going to try and build a new product, well, we need to think about not just a customer, but the customer and their environment, the customer and how the customer makes their decisions, why the customer is going to buy our product and not somebody else's. So there are a lot of theories that have helped over the years. And I think sometimes maybe some of the gaps in those theories, well, they can be filled in a little bit with some 4E cognition, where we're going to take the environment into account. One of the tools that reminds me of that I really like, that's on that vein, is I don't know if you know the Innovation Games book. A lot of people know. So Innovation Games is, a lot of people know about the product box workshop from Innovation Games. It's Luke Homan who wrote this. And the product box is where you ask customers to make the cereal box. If your product were a box on a cereal box on a shelf in a supermarket, what would that box look like? So you give these cereal boxes you put white paper over them, and you give a whole bunch of arts and crafts materials and magazines to cut out, and so they make a collage and stuff, and they write on your box, and they show in different customer groups will show you different boxes of what they think that your product box would be on the shelf. And that can help you really understand how your product is perceived by the customer. And also, I find that it's great because it makes the customer do your marketing for you. Because if they think it's convincing, then other customers will probably think it's convincing. Another workshop that's in Innovation Games is called the Spider Web. I think it's that. And the thing about the spider web is you ask customers, when you use our product, what else are you doing? So you try and build out this sort of spider web around the product of, okay, what are the combinations that you're doing with that product? What other products are you? But what you're trying to do, you don't ask these questions directly. What you're trying to do is establish, okay, what are the interactions between the product that I'm currently building or making, selling, and with other products that are on the market. So then sometimes you can discover new jobs to be done, or you can better understand the jobs to be done. You can discover maybe some synergies that you need to pursue. I'm a sucker for Lego synergies with other products. Behind me, I have quite a few boxes. Oh, they're right over there. I have a few boxes that IKEA and Lego made together to store Lego pieces, obviously, and they have these lovely little studs. Oh, yeah. This is going to fail completely. Yeah, they have these lovely little studs on top of the boxes. So yeah, that's a synergy that IKEA had with Lego. Obviously, when Lego come out with a licensed IP themed whatever, and I like the IP, then it just sort of goes hand in hand. It's like, take my money. But so that's kind of trying to explore what the environment of the person is like. And then that's with an established product. So maybe with a new product, what you might want to try and see is, okay, it kind of follows with ethnography. It's what's the environment of the person like? What are some of the different touch points, the different parameters, the affordances, the anti-affordances? And also, what are the social environments? So what are the narratives that people are saying and repeating and are echoing? What are the memes that they're sharing around that kind of problem?
Here's what I like, but maybe, so correct me if I'm kind of putting words into your mouth now, but at least when I do like customer exploration in interviews, I feel like, or to put it in a very, I don't mean it 100% like I'm saying it, but sometimes the person that you're talking to, they are not the best source about themselves.
Yes.
So right. So in a weird way, you have to get them to talk about themselves in a different way than just asking them directly, because you get different answers. So we quite often have these, for example, when we talk about I don't know, nutrition is an example that comes often to mind. So when we talk about nutrition, usually in an hour-long discussion, the first 10 minutes, everybody tells me how well they, of course, they eat fruits and vegetables and all that kind of stuff. And then you ask them other questions, and you're just trying to get them, well, tell me about the last time you went to a supermarket. And then kind of by kind of way of I don't know, making circumvention, talking about other stuff, and then what was the weather like, and then suddenly the truth emerges. But it's not, you don't get there in the direct way. If you ask in the direct way, you get noise, you get socially acceptable answers.
Dreamland.
Yeah.
So putting a lamp in their face doesn't work.
Yeah, and I don't think it's they're not being dishonest. I think it's not that. I think it's just it has to do with how we know about ourselves and how we kind of are able to express knowledge about ourselves. And I feel like a lot of these techniques are trying to get at the truth, because the direct way, it always misfires. But I don't know if that kind of was a part of the gist of what you were talking about.
Yeah, that definitely falls out of these theories. Absolutely. And so it's a question of context. It's a question of tacit knowledge as well. How do you prompt for tacit knowledge?
Yeah.
One of the other principles that Dave Snowden has is that you only know what you know when you need to know it.
Yeah.
And one of the personal examples I give is that so I'm a musician. I can sing a certain number of songs off by heart. If you ask me to start singing a song from the second verse, I go completely blank. Yeah. I have to sing the first verse, then the chorus, and then magically the words of the second verse pop into my head. Yeah. Also, for those who still listen to CDs or still have memories of listening to CDs with the tracks, or at least tracks in order on the album, for some reason the next song pops into your head at the end of the previous song.
Yeah.
So I would like to move forward with, so there's a lot of ground that we can cover here, and it's a bit of a challenge to know how to go about this, but I prepared some quotes from an article by Nassim Taleb, which I just wanted to get your take on. So it's an article that you can find online called "Understanding is a Poor Substitute for Convexity or Anti-Fragility." So it's he had a book called Anti-Fragile. And I'll just read it out and see how it resonates. So this is him talking. So it is in complex systems, ones in which we have little visibility of the chains of cause consequences, that tinkering, bricolage, or similar variations of trial and error have been shown to vastly outperform the teleological. So teleological means purpose or goal-driven. It is nature's modus operandi. But tinkering needs to be convex. It is imperative. And then he explains what he means by convexity.
What does he mean?
Well, I'm gonna keep reading. There needs to be a significant asymmetry between the gains, as they need to be large, and the errors small or harmless. It is from such asymmetry that luck and trial and error can produce results. The nonlinear properties of the payoff function, that is convexity, allow us to formulate rational and rigorous research policies, and ones that allow the harvesting of randomness. The antifragile, gaining from uncertainty, favors optionality over the teleological in an opaque system, as it can be shown that the teleological or goal-driven is hurt under increased uncertainty. So I'll maybe just rephrase a bit what is being said here, but I think it's a really interesting idea. So the idea is that basically sometimes it's worthwhile to basically tinker and just try out stuff, okay? But then the next question, and that kind of goes back to what I was asking at the beginning. I mean, for this tacit knowledge, I mean, do we just need to, okay, just do it seems like a bit of a, not very useful somehow. So that was kind of our discussion around that. And so here, what he's suggesting is, there's in a way a good way of tinkering and a less good way. Okay. And the idea is that you need to recognize situations where there's low risk. So that's exactly what you mentioned. And also we've discussed on various occasions. So the Cynevin principle of safe to fail probes, etc. So you basically can test things out, but with not much risk, and where there's potentially a big upside. And so trying to recognize these areas where there could potentially be a big upside, but not really a big downside. And I thought that was quite an interesting idea. I wondered if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, a few. So I won't say that anything I say is a direct commentary on the article, because I haven't read it enough.
Yep.
And so I won't say that what I'm saying is a criticism of it. So I'd have to unpack it a bit more. One thing that I might adjust is this notion of convexity. From a maths standpoint, I don't quite understand what he's trying to say.
It basically just means that
there are a lot of, I've seen the thing. It says that basically the potential pain is less than the potential gain, is what he's saying. But there are a lot of functions that it could be concave and still be that. But anyway, a few things is that the potential gain. Sometimes I think it's useful to tinker, even if you have absolutely no idea what the gain could be. So it's really about the pain. It's about the safe to fail. It's not, can I win big? How much can I win? Is it safe to fail? I think is the primary thing, and is it coherent as well? Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos ill fame, she tried to revolutionize blood tests, and thought that you could just you could do all the blood tests in the world using just a few drops of blood. The first professor that she presented this idea told her it is impossible. She still tried to do it. She found out and wasted a whole bunch of money, and also wreaked a lot of havoc on a lot of patients by giving them bad results. But she confirmed that it still isn't possible. So you don't try things that are deeply impossible. You don't try things that have a huge risk, too huge of a risk to come back from. But then you might not know what the gain is. And there are a lot of things like in maths. Somebody came up with this really weird idea, some quirky bit of maths, didn't find any application. A century later, physics picked it up and said, "Hey, this solves this problem." So I don't think you don't need to wait for the gain necessarily to start tinkering around. Another thing is that your curves are not necessarily going to be just one curve. It's going to be multiple sort of like sine waves, or lots of little valleys and ups and downs, and that your optimum, it could be in one of the valleys, but you don't know which one. And so if you just do a gradient descent into whatever valley you're in, well, you might not reach the optimum. And so that's where the parallel multiple safe to fail comes in. Mm-hmm. If you want to find a new valley, and something that's more optimal, you've got to try at various different points on the line to give you the maximum chance of finding something optimal.
So I think I'd had this exchange with Tom Kerwin, also a former guest of the podcast, on one of his webinars. It still remains the problem to try and figure out what are the probes you're going to do, and that's what I actually found uh, interesting in this article is, and the way I picture it, say you're the head of some kind of like big company, and you want to figure out where you want your R&D to be, what you want your R&D to be focused on, or it could be even, head of some, let's say, university or something, and, who do you give money to? You still need some kind of an idea. And what I liked about this Nassim Taleb idea is that it gives you kind of a pointer. Now it remains the question, obviously, how can you actually say if something is going to have a convex gain function? I mean, he doesn't really get into how you can recognize that, but I thought the idea was quite interesting, because it still remains that even if you're doing parallel probes, you're still having to decide at least a region within which you're going to be doing these probes. And I'm not sure I've seen. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you have some ideas around that.
Okay, yeah. So I wanted to get into jobs to be done, and so this will be my avenue for that. A slight critique about some of the jobs to be done experts. I think jobs to be done is really, really useful, and I've also used it with customers, and I've suggested it to customers, recommended it to customers. But I think where sometimes some experts get way out of off base is when they try and post hoc justify the method for every single situation. So you come up with a little critique. You say, well, it doesn't really work in this way. A need, is this really a need? Is this not really a need? And, oh, well, in that situation, I use this heuristic. And it just goes into dreamland, I find quite easily. Because I think that jobs to be done is really interesting when you already have a vague idea of what direction you're heading in. And you're then trying to refine that. So you have the need, and then you're trying to refine it. I think where it gets in really big problems is when you're trying to find a need that you don't have at all, or you're trying to come up with it. And this is where complexity comes in. It's the problem is completely complex. You need to probe around. You need to start trying to do things and seeing how people react. I think one of the guests that you had on, I can't remember which one, he kind of got into that. He kind of said, well, yeah, we can define the need ahead of time, and then we try things out, and then it kind of refines our definition of the need. And I said, well, yeah, because you tried things out, not because you managed to calculate it ahead of time. And so to bring this back to the Taleb concept, I think, and how to scope things, I think one of the insights might be stop focusing on output and start focusing on input. So not output, sorry, stop focusing on outcomes and start focusing on input. So there's a lot of debate about people are focusing too much on output, and they should start focusing on outcomes. So I think jobs to be done is good with that. It's not just let's just submerge the market with a bunch of products. It's okay, what is the job? What is the outcome that I'm trying to produce in the world? And when we don't know what that is, and we're in complexity and deep complexity, I think we need to focus on input. So can we change the input? Can we change the perspective that we have of the world around? Can we change the perspective that we have of our customers? Can we change the perspective that the customer has on their own environment? And to give a couple concrete examples, there's do people know of Piaggio, the Piaggio company in Italy?
So they make like moped type things, yeah?
Yes.
Scooters.
Do you know
I don't know what
they're
not called scooters.
Do they know what they used to make before and during the Second World War?
No idea.
No.
They made airplanes.
Yeah.
So Second World War, before the Second World War, they're making airplanes. During the Second World War, they're making especially fighter planes. Italy then gets retaken by the Allies, and the order is you cannot make anything that resembles military at all for X years. I can't remember exactly. But so that's basically Piaggio's whole business. You cannot make airplanes. That's gone up in smoke. And so the question is, okay, do we stop? Do we just, close the business down and say, okay, we can't do anything? What they did was they went and looked at their stock. So, okay, what's our input? What do we have? We got some tires. We've got some motor. We've got some engines. We've got some chassis. We've got some metal that we can make things out of. Okay, so that's our stock. That's our input. Then we go to the engineers. What can we build with the same input that is not an airplane? Okay, few different ideas. One idea was a small moped. All right, build a few prototypes, test it with various different people. Okay, there's an opportunity on the market. Can we sell this? Well, yeah, there's likely we can sell this because at the moment there are a lot of people who are working who need a small means of transportation. Okay, then the next problem is finance. How do we finance this? Well, people can't buy it up front, but they're working, so maybe we could loan. We could do it on a loan. So first consumer loan comes into play, is invented for this. And then the pièce de résistance is to manage to put it into a major motion picture. What was it, with Audrey Hepburn going through Rome on with the love interest on the back of a Vespa. And so now the Vespa is very well known. And that pivot, it didn't come with focusing on a job to be done at first. It focused on the input. And so in a lot of companies, I think we can say, okay, yes, we don't want to have our research and development department completely pivot ourselves when we don't have to, because there are lots of companies who have tried to diversify and it's been a big disaster. However, I think one of the ways you can maybe control R&D is to say, here are the means that we give you, here are the tools that we give you, make things with those tools, and then just tell us what happens with it, and also don't burn down the building.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of effectuation. So I don't know if you know about it. It's a very similar idea that by Sarah Sarasvati. That's her concept, that studying entrepreneurs and how they go about building their companies, that they often start from where they are. So meaning they look at what are their competencies, what resources they have access to, and they use that information to then define what they're going to do, basically. So they start from where they are to think about where they're going to go. And I think that, reminds me a bit of that for sure.
Yeah, and making sure that where we're going to go is a next step. It's a realizable step. It's not a far off North Star. That's important. It's what's called the adjacent possible. And then you explore multiple of those, and you see what happens, and you also see how that changes your perception. So it's going to feed back into input. The fact that you change the complex environment, anything you do is going to change the environment. You cannot observe a complex system without changing it. And so as you observe, as you make little changes, it's going to change the environment and also change what is possible and what isn't possible.
Yeah. So as we have two jobs to be done experts here and practitioners, so what I hear very often is that, and I think it's I like it, it's that the jobs to be done focuses on describing the problem, but the implementation then is often considered to be something a bit separate, and that it's basically for people on the, let's say, solution side to come up with something. What are your thoughts on that in that respect? And or maybe say a bit differently, what could people who are active in jobs to be done maybe take from these different notions we've discussed and integrate potentially in their own way of working?
I think that there are, as Ecclesiastes says, there's a time for everything under the sun. I think there are situations where that's perfectly fine. You get to focus on the problem, you get to go deep dive into it, you do ethnography, you sort of question things, you go observe, and you really get geeky on the problem. And then once you've figured things out, you send that to the solution side. And it's not just the people who are in jobs to be done doing the discovery part that like to have that separation. It's also some people who are builders. Some people, they don't necessarily, they just want to hear this, to see the specifications and then build it. That's what they love to do. And so there are lots of people in the world. We need them all, and we need them all to be different. And so there's definitely a time for doing that, to have somebody go really deep expert into the problem space, give off a specification, have somebody really good at building that solution and doing that. And when you can, that's great. I think that's you could try and find opportunities where you might want to mix the two a bit more. You might want to even start biasing by action. So try little things out to see how it changes. There's one thing one concept that I really like is called prototyping. So it's not prototyping, it's pretotyping. It's before the prototype is it actually works, but it's maybe not built the way that you want it, and it's not it may be a bit ugly. Pretotype is where you haven't even worked out if it's feasible. You want to see what market signal you can elicit. So this is Alberto Savoia, an ex Google employee who wrote a book called Build the Right It. And in this, he describes various types of prototypes where, for instance, there's the Mechanical Turk, where the Mechanical Turk historically was apparently an automaton that could play chess like a grandmaster. And the trick was that there was an actual chess grandmaster inside the mechanics who was very short. It was a dwarf who was hidden inside. And so they were the one who was pulling the bells and whistles. And so instead of you say, oh, here's a machine that can do X, Y, Z. And you ask people to put things in the machine and press the button, and then out will come the thing. And what they don't know is that actually there are people inside the machine or behind the machine that are actually doing the work. And you're just trying to simulate it just to see if would people actually use this machine? Would actually people place an order for a machine like that? And if you get enough signal from market, then you're going to go build it. And so I think there's things, and this goes with enactivism, if we want to relink that back to 4E cognition and enacted cognition. It's sometimes we need to act in the world in order to then discover the problem a bit more. So yeah, I think there are times for different things. There's time for acting and then observing. There are times for observing a long time and then building the product.
Fantastic. So I think we'll bring it to a close. I had a few more questions. Maybe as these topics might be of interest to people, maybe they want to look into them a bit more. Would you have a few book recommendations around 4E cognition, for example? I mean, anything that's, because I found a lot of stuff when I looked into it, but it's all fairly very, very long and deep technical books. I don't know if you have anything that you enjoyed.
Well, so maybe if you want something that's lighter, I think I'd suggest more like YouTube talks that are on YouTube. So there's Tony Chemero, Chemero, who is a researcher who sort of went into the ecological psychology side. So he's drawn on Gibson and tried to further that research. He wrote a book called Radical Embodied Cognitive Science. But before reading the book, maybe I would suggest looking up some of his talks, which are really good. There's one that's called The World Around Us, which talks about how the hypothesis that we don't need to think of the brain having a representation of the outside world to be able to act in it. The outside world is representation enough. And so using the affordances in the world, we actually just react to things. And I think that's really interesting to get into the topic. There's also Andy Clark, philosopher who does a lot of work in neuroscience, so cognitive philosophy. He's got a few talks online, and he's also got quite a few books that are probably more approachable. Andy Clark, he's more on the science communication sort of. He's a philosopher, but he does things in more of a science communication style, so it's more approachable.
Fantastic. I also would recommend a book that is fairly deep, but it was a pretty good book which is called Embodying Design, an Applied Science of Radical Embodied Cognition by Christopher Baber. I don't know how you pronounce it, but it was quite an interesting book, precisely on how for cognition and this type of stuff connects with innovation and design. Okay,
I think just to say one last recommendation would be, again, Don Norman. I've revisited some of his recent talks, and there's also the design of everyday things. I think that Don Norman doesn't always have the vocabulary of complexity science, but I think he gets it. One of the talks I recently listened to, he says it differently. The things that I've said during this talk, he says them differently, and so sometimes just saying it differently, and plus he's coming from UX design, that might be more approachable to some people.
Yeah, definitely. And there was an article he wrote, which I thought was very good, called Design X. I think he wrote it with another guy called Stappers. Design X with Don Norman, and he talks about a lot of, it's called Design X Complex Socio-Technical Systems. And I think he gets very much into that space. And I've noticed that he's gone more and more into that direction of complex systems, etc. So that was a good one. Okay, I had a last question. I believe you're a board game enthusiast. Is that correct?
Yeah, there might be a few board gamers behind me. Yep, totally.
So my question was, what game would you recommend? Imagine you had to talk about, like, try and get these ideas we've discussed across to some people that you've got invited at your house. Like, what game embodies these concepts in your opinion? Like, you would think of?
Yeah, I don't know if this is a great recommendation. It's kind of off the cuff, but there's a game that I really enjoy. It's called Root. It's I've got one of the boxes back there. It's by Cole Worley, and Leader Games produces it. And it's very, I think Cole Worley gets complexity too. And there are lots of, you can look up some talks. They do designer diaries and some chats that they've recorded online. And when he talks about how he designs games, sort of designing it as an emergent interaction between the players, their ecosystem, the games, the pieces of the game and everything, I've used it to also draw inspiration for these kind of concepts. So I don't know if people are going to like Root. You may not like Root as a game, but I think the concepts that it brings are really interesting.
Fantastic. Well, so that concludes today. Oh, sorry, actually, no, before that, I mean, let's just talk about where people can find out about you. So you have a website, which is namrats.net, namrats.net.
Yes.
And I think we can access most of your material there. Is there anything else you wanted to put forward?
Or LinkedIn, yeah, on LinkedIn. And I just created a Blue Sky account because apparently everybody's on there.
Fantastic.
So content to follow.
Okay. Well, now then that concludes today's Product Quest podcast. So please send any comments or ideas for future shows to productquestpodcast@gmail.com. See you next time.
Hope to see you around sometime.
On LinkedIn, around there, yeah.
That's
right. All right.
Okay.
Have a good rest of your day.